Imagine this: London, summer 1858. You step outside your front door, and the smell hits you like a wall. Not unpleasant, not bad. Something beyond those words entirely. A thick, suffocating, biological stench rising off the River Thames that makes your eyes water and your stomach lurch before you've even taken 3 steps out your front door. This is the most powerful city in the world, the capital of an empire that spans a quarter of the globe, home to 2 million people, magnificent architecture, the greatest parliament in the democratic world. And it smells like an open grave. The Thames, the river that runs through the heart of everything, has become, over decades of neglect, an open sewer. Every cesspit in the city overflows into it. Every slaughterhouse drains into it. 2 million people's worth of daily biological reality collected and deposited into one river, sitting in the summer heat, fermenting. Inside the House of Parliament, members of Parliament have soaked the curtains in chloride of lime just to be able to breathe. But it doesn't fully work. Sessions are being abandoned. The most powerful legislative body in the world cannot function because the smell outside is too overwhelming to ignore. They call it the Great Stink. And here's the thing: people are dying from it. Not from the smell itself, from what the smell represents. The same contaminated water that produces the stench is the water people are drinking. Cholera moves through London's poorest neighborhoods like a fire through dry grass. Thousands of people every year dead from a disease that doesn't have to exist, that wouldn't exist if someone would just deal with where the waste goes. For decades, the city has patched and improvised and hoped for the best. This summer, finally, it's become impossible to pretend any longer. And out of that crisis, out of the stench and the disease and the desperate, shameful urgency of the most powerful city on earth drowning in its own filth, came one of the greatest engineering achievements in human history. And eventually, the invention of something you've walked past 10,000 times without a second thought. Believe it or not, everything about the modern public restroom, every fixture, every pipe, every design decision you've never had to think about, traces back to one catastrophic summer in London, when the smell got so bad that Parliament finally had to do something about it. Welcome to Believe It or Not, the show where weird is real and the truth is stranger than fiction. I'm your host, Bryan, and today's story is about a city in crisis, an engineer who saved millions of lives without anyone really noticing, and how the desperate effort to stop London from choking on its own waste gave the world the modern public restroom. It's one of the most important stories almost nobody knows, and one of the most disgusting, which honestly makes it better. Here's something uncomfortable about the Great Stink. It wasn't a surprise. London had been building toward the crisis for decades. The city's population had exploded during the Industrial Revolution, from about 1 million people in 1800 to over 2 million by 1850. And its waste infrastructure hadn't come close to keeping up. The system for dealing with human waste was primitive and ancient. Cesspits, which are essentially large holes dug beneath houses, emptied periodically by workers called night soilmen, who came under cover of darkness and carted everything away before the city woke up. It had worked more or less when London was smaller. It was catastrophically inadequate for a city of 2 million. The cesspits overflowed constantly. Waste seeped through soil into wells. Wells fed into the Thames. The Thames fed back into the drinking supply. And cholera, a waterborne disease that kills through rapid, violent dehydration, thrived in every drop of it. The 1832 cholera outbreak killed 6,500 Londoners. The 1848 outbreak killed 14,000. The 1854 outbreak killed 10,000 more. Every time the city mourned, appointed committees, wrote reports, and did almost nothing structural to fix the underlying problem. Because fixing it properly would be expensive. It would be disruptive. It would require someone to make difficult decisions. And so they waited until the summer of 1858, when the Thames got so bad that the smell drifted through the windows of Parliament itself. And suddenly, the people with the power to fix it couldn't escape the consequences of not fixing it. That's when they called Joseph Bazalgette. Bazalgette was a civil engineer, quiet, methodical, not famous, not glamorous. He had been working for years on proposals for a London sewer system that kept getting delayed, defunded, and shelved by politicians who didn't want to spend the money. The Great Stink ended that conversation. Parliament gave him the authorization he'd been waiting for, and Bazalgette got to work on something that had never been attempted at this scale: a complete, integrated underground sewer network for one of the largest cities on Earth. The numbers are staggering even today. Over 1,300 miles of street sewers, 82 miles of main interception sewers, and 318 million bricks. All of it engineered by hand, calculated without computers, designed to move waste by gravity alone, through a system so precisely graded that it would function without pumping stations in most of the city. Now, the system wasn't built overnight. It took 18 years to build. When it was finished, cholera disappeared from London almost immediately, and life expectancy in the city began rising for the first time in decades. The Thames slowly, gradually began to recover. And here's the detail about Bazalgette that I can't stop thinking about. When engineers examined his work later, they found that he had built the pipes roughly 3 times larger than his own calculations said were necessary. Someone asked him why. He said, "Well, we're only going to do this once." He built for a city that didn't exist yet. He built for the London of 50 years later, 100 years later, 200 years later. He built for people he would never meet, solving problems he would never live to see. And much of his sewer system is still running beneath London right now. Today, as you listen to this. Joseph Bazalgette saved more lives than almost any individual in the 19th century. The historian Stephen Johnson estimated that Bazalgette's sewer system may have saved more lives than any other single public works project in human history, by eliminating cholera from one of the world's most densely populated cities and providing a model that other cities followed around the globe. And almost nobody knows his name. His sewer system worked so perfectly that it has become, in the most literal sense, invisible. It runs beneath London continuously, silently, every second of every day. And the people walking over it have no reason to know it exists, which means it has succeeded completely. That's a strange kind of legacy to leave. You spend your life solving a problem so thoroughly that future generations can't even imagine the problem existed. The suffering you prevented is invisible. The lives you saved never knew they needed saving. The work itself disappears underground, and you disappear with it. But here's what I think about when I think about Bazalgette. He knew that that was going to happen. He built it 3 times bigger than it needed to be. Not because anyone asked him to, not because anyone would notice, but because he understood that good work outlasts the person who does it. He was building for people he'd never meet, in a future he'd never see. There's something quietly extraordinary about that. Doing the work right, even when, especially when, nobody is watching and nobody will know. Now, here are a few believe it or not facts I found while researching the podcast. Believe it or not, the Great Stink was so unbearable that it didn't just disrupt Parliament, it completely reordered the British government's priorities overnight. For years, politicians had blocked sewer funding as too expensive. Then, the smell reached their windows. The bill passed in 18 days. It turns out the fastest way to get powerful people to fix a problem is to make sure they personally cannot escape it. Believe it or not, the night soil men, remember those workers who emptied London's cesspits before the sewer system was built, worked exclusively between midnight and 5 a.m. by law, because the smell of their work was considered unbearable during daylight hours. They were essential to the functioning of the entire city, touched by almost everyone's daily life, and almost completely invisible to polite society. When Bazalgette's sewer made their jobs obsolete, nobody wrote them any tributes. Believe it or not, Bazalgette built his sewer pipes 3 times larger than his calculations required. And that decision is the reason London hasn't had to rebuild its Victorian sewer system, despite the city's population tripling since then. He didn't just solve the problem in front of him. He quietly solved problems that wouldn't exist for another 100 years, for people who would never know his name. Believe it or not, when Bazalgette died in 1891, his obituary in the Times of London was respectful, but brief. The politicians who had blocked his proposal for years and then celebrated the finished sewer system as a triumph of civic leadership received far more coverage in their time. History has spent the past 130 years quietly correcting that imbalance, which is why today there is a memorial to Bazalgette on the Victoria Embankment in London, built directly above the sewers he designed. He is buried, in a sense, in his own greatest achievement. And that seems exactly right. Now, let's see how much you were paying attention. I'll ask the question, you shout out the answer. Are you ready? Then let's get started. Question number 1. What was the Great Stink? And what finally made the government fix it? The answer? The catastrophic summer of 1858, when the Thames became so polluted it was unbearable. And the government finally acted when the smell reached Parliament itself and made it impossible to work. Question number 2. How long did it take to complete the London sewer system. It wasn't built overnight, that's for sure. It took 18 long years from start to finish. And finally, question number 3. True or false? Bazalgette built his sewers just large enough to handle London's population at the time. That's false for sure. He built them 3 times larger than necessary, which is why they're still working today, over 150 years later, even though London's population has tripled. Bazalgette spent years watching politicians delay and defund his proposals, knowing people were dying from a problem he already knew how to fix. And then built a solution 3 times bigger than anyone asked for a future he'd never lived to see. So here's the question. What does it look like to do work that's bigger than your own lifetime? And is it possible to care deeply about something, to give it your best? Even knowing that if you succeed, no one will ever have to think about it or you ever again. Here's a little reminder. If you're enjoying Believe It or Not, follow or subscribe wherever you listen. And be sure to share this episode with someone who has never once thought about where it all goes, which before today was probably you. Next time on Believe It or Not, it's December 6th, 1917, the harbor of Halifax, Nova Scotia. 2 ships are on a collision course. One of them is carrying thousands of tons of explosives. In minutes, it will produce the largest man-made explosion in history, before the atomic bomb. The blast will flatten an entire neighborhood, shatter windows 50 miles away, and send a tsunami crashing through the harbor. Just before it happens, one man sees what's coming. His name is Vince Coleman. He's a train dispatcher, an ordinary man with an ordinary job. And he has a choice to make in the next 30 seconds that will determine whether an incoming passenger train carrying hundreds of people drives straight into the disaster zone. He could run. He should run. Everyone else is running. But Vince Coleman sits back down at his telegraph and starts typing. It's the most important message he will ever send. It's the true story of the man who stayed and the city he saved. You won't want to miss it. But before we go, here's a joke for you about going number 1. A little boy asked his mom, "Do men wipe after they pee?" And his mom said, "Of course they do. They wipe the floor, they wipe the seat, they wipe the wall." I remember those days. Until next time, keep wondering, keep learning, and remember, sometimes the truth is weirder than fiction.